Imagine waking up one day, not in your bed, but in a vast, ornate cage. The bars are not cold iron, but woven from the soft, comforting threads of your daily routine, the 9-to-5 grind, the curated social media feed, the endless consumption, the pursuit of comfort and distraction. You look around, and you see millions of others in their own gilded prisons, meticulously polishing the bars, convinced they are a frame for their freedom. The food is delivered on schedule, processed entertainment, pre-approved opinions, a steady stream of low-grade anxieties and high-octane pleasures. You are well-fed, adequately entertained, and utterly, profoundly unfree. This isn't a dungeon. It's a perfectly climate-controlled, ergonomically designed existence where all genuine risk has been removed, and with it, all genuine meaning. This is the great, terrifying paradox of the modern age. We are richer, safer, and more technologically connected than any generation in human history. Yet we are plagued by an epidemic of spiritual poverty, anxiety, and a crushing sense of futility. We are the slaves who not only love their servitude, as Rousseau once lamented, but who have come to believe their chains are actually essential parts of their identity. Look closer at the man next to you, or, more uncomfortably, at your own reflection. You see the frantic, exhausted eyes of someone perpetually running, but from what and toward what? They are chasing a finish line that perpetually recedes, a happiness defined not by an inner conviction, but by an outer consensus. They are a ghost in their own machine, performing a life that was written for them by forces they never bothered to name, let alone challenge. The great German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, stared into this abyss over a century ago and saw our future with chilling clarity. He did not ask if you were happy. He asked a far more unsettling question. Do you have the courage to live a life of your own choosing, or are you merely the after-echo of 1,000 prior choices made by others? We operate under the illusion of radical self-determination. We choose our clothing, our streaming service, our political team. But these are just menu options in a massive, prepackaged cafeteria of existence. The true questions, the ones that separate the living from the merely functioning, go unasked. Questions like, is my morality truly mine, or is it a hand-me-down from a fading tradition I never personally interrogated? Is my ambition my authentic calling, or just a psychological defense mechanism against feeling worthless? Is my joy a genuine, earned state of being, or chemically induced flutter masking a profound emptiness? We have mastered the world, yet we have become strangers to ourselves. We have outsourced our critical thinking to algorithms and our self-worth to the fickle, fleeting attention of the digital crowd. The paradox is that the very things we believe are making us more real. The relentless need to document and share, the pursuit of external validation, are the chains that bind us, slowly eroding the bedrock of our inner world. Think of the last man Nietzsche warned us about, the comfortable, contented creature who blinks and says, "We have invented happiness." This is the person who avoids all sharp edges, all genuine struggle, all meaningful risk. They seek only comfort and security, and in doing so, they sacrifice their potential, their greatness, and their very soul. They are the ultimate slave, precisely because they believe they are the ultimate beneficiary of progress. So, here is the urgent, necessary question that demands an answer from the deepest part of your being. Are you the master of your own soul, or are you simply a finely tuned, highly efficient cog in a machine built by the forgotten, the fearful, and the spiritually dead, We must now peel back the skin of this comfortable illusion and confront the mechanical, pre-programmed roots of our own psychological servitude. The chains are not on your wrists, they are in your mind. And to break them, you must first understand the unseen history and terrifying power of the force that forged them. The psychological chains that bind us are not external. They are forged in the quiet, unconscious compromises we make every single day. The problem is not merely that we are pursuing the wrong things, but that the mechanism of our desire itself has been hijacked. This hidden problem is what Nietzsche called the spirit of gravity, a paralyzing psychological inertia fueled by centuries of philosophical evasion and social pressure, a deeply rooted fear of the awesome, terrifying responsibility of being truly free. Where does this fear come from? It originates in what Arthur Schopenhauer termed the will to live, but distorted and diminished. For Schopenhauer, this will is a blind, ceaseless, striving force that generates endless dissatisfaction. But modern society has found a cunning way to tame this primal energy. By channeling it into trivial, easily consumable, and ultimately meaningless goals. Instead of striving for profound self-overcoming, we strive for a bigger television, a better job title, or more likes on a post. We trade the agonizing depth of genuine existence for the shallow width of endless distraction. This surrender to the superficial is a masterful psychological trick, a defense mechanism against the true burden of existence. Jean-Paul Sartre called this defense bad faith, mauvaise foi. Bad faith is the deliberate self-deception that allows us to deny our radical freedom. If we admit we are condemned to be free, as Sartre suggested, we must also admit that we are 100% responsible for every choice we make, every value we hold, and every outcome we experience. This total responsibility is existentially terrifying. To escape this terror, we adopt prefabricated identities. We say, I am an accountant, or I am a Democrat, or I am a consumer. These roles, these labels provide a comforting shield, a socially acceptable script that exempts us from having to invent ourselves from scratch, moment by moment. We hide behind the collective, convincing ourselves that our obligations to society, to family expectations, or to tradition are unavoidable necessities, when often they are merely comfortable cages we chose to build around ourselves. The roots of this servitude run deep into our collective psyche, a darkness that Carl Jung illuminated as the shadow. The shadow is the collection of all the characteristics, impulses, and potentials we deem unacceptable and exile from our conscious personality. What is often exiled today? The capacity for fierce independence, the willingness to be wrong, the desire for creative solitude, and, most critically, the courage to live a life that makes sense only to us. We project this exiled potential onto external authorities, the government, the experts, the gurus, the influencers. We seek external validation because we are terrified of the internal validation that comes from integrating our shadow, from accepting our messy, contradictory, and potentially disruptive whole self. The result is a society full of what Jung called unindividuated people, adults who are still operating on the borrowed values and neuroses of their childhood or their culture. This brings us back to Nietzsche's radical critique of morality itself. He argued that much of what we call goodness is simply slave morality, a system of values invented by the weak, the resentful, and the mediocre to limit and punish the strong, the noble, and the independent, Slave morality praises qualities like humility, patience, and obedience, qualities that prevent the individual from rising above the herd and challenging the status quo. It defines virtue as the lack of power, making the unadventurous, comfortable life seem like the most moral one. This system acts as a psychological sedative, convincing the potential master of his own life that his greatest achievement is to be a well-behaved servant of the system. Philosophically, this spiritual slavery is underpinned by what Viktor Frankl identified as the existential vacuum, the widespread feeling of meaninglessness that arises when our primal drives are satisfied, but our fundamental need for a purpose that transcends self-interest is not. We fill this vacuum with consumption, addiction, superficial busyness, and frantic attempts at self-aggrandizement. The slave is always busy, always consuming, always distracted, because true silence and stillness would force him to confront the terrifying emptiness at the core of his unchosen life. This is the psychological reality. We are fundamentally addicted to the ease of conformity, terrified of the responsibility of originality, and convinced that our borrowed life is the only one possible. The problem isn't just that we are slaves, it's that we have internalized the voice of the master and made it our own, convincing ourselves that self-denial and comfortable mediocrity are the highest forms of wisdom. But what does this silent, subtle servitude actually cost us? How does it ripple outward to shape not just our inner world, but the very fabric of our shared reality? The consequences are far more profound and insidious than we dare to imagine. The acceptance of a borrowed life is not a victimless crime. The consequences are subtle, systemic, and ultimately corrosive to the human spirit. This silent servitude shapes not just your personal unhappiness, but the trajectory of entire societies, creating a world where collective delusion is the reigning currency. The first major unseen consequence is the death of personal authority and the rise of mass hysteria. When you consistently outsource your meaning and values, when you rely on the crowd for validation, direction, and moral footing, you atrophy the very muscles of independent judgment. This renders you profoundly vulnerable to manipulation. Psychologically, this is the victory of the confirmation bias and the bandwagon effect on a global scale. We don't seek truth. We seek affiliation. We don't evaluate evidence. We check the consensus. The urgent emotional need to belong overrides the quiet, difficult duty to think for yourself. In times of crisis, this psychological fragility explodes into mass hysteria, where fear and outrage become infectious, and the search for a scapegoat replaces the search for a solution. Consider the societal consequence of this spiritual laziness: the cult of the superficial and the suppression of depth. Our culture is increasingly designed to reward the broad and shallow over the narrow and deep. The pursuit of immediate, measurable outcomes, likes, followers, revenue, metrics, replaces the patient, internal work of developing character, mastering a difficult skill, or achieving genuine insight. This is a manifestation of what the ancient Greeks feared: pleonexia, the insatiable desire for more that drives the system, regardless of its ultimate meaning or ethical cost. The slave is kept busy collecting trinkets and chasing fleeting highs, ensuring they never have the time, the silence, or the stillness to ask the fundamental question: what is this all for? When depth is suppressed, genuine connection fades, replaced by transactional relationships and performative solidarity. Neuroscience offers a chilling insight into this enslavement. Every time you seek a quick fix, be it a dopamine hit from a phone notification, a sugar rush, or the quick release of anger in an argument. You reinforce the neural pathways of instant gratification. You are, quite literally, conditioning your brain to prefer the immediate, predictable, and low-effort stimulus over the delayed, uncertain, and high-effort reward of meaningful creation or self-mastery. The slave brain becomes one that is easily programmable, trained to respond to simple cues rather than to engage in complex, multi-layered deliberation. Cognitive entropy sets in. The mind, like any system left to its own devices, slides towards disorder and the path of least resistance. Perhaps the most devastating unseen consequence is the systemic manufacturing of resentment and envy. If you live a life based on someone else's script, you will inevitably end up resentful, either toward the people you believe dictated your path, or, more darkly, toward those who seem to possess the authentic freedom you have forfeited. Nietzsche's resentment, that deep, corrosive, hidden hostility toward life, power, and success, becomes the default emotional setting of the slave. This isn't just personal bitterness. It's a powerful cultural force. We see it in the constant, simmering urge to tear down greatness, to simplify complex achievements, and to equate all outcomes. If you are not brave enough to try and fail spectacularly on your own terms, it is psychologically easier to argue that no one else should be allowed to succeed spectacularly either. This subtle but pervasive environment of envy and moral leveling ensures that the majority of people remain trapped in mediocrity, making the jump to radical self-authorship an act of staggering social and psychological defiance. Ultimately, the unseen consequence is the tragic wastage of potential. Every mind that chooses the comfort of the crowd over the terror of the self is a loss to the entire species. The great novels unwritten, the difficult truths unspoken, the radical inventions unpursued. These are the real costs of a society optimized for compliant consumption. You feel this consequence as a dull, chronic ache, a low-grade, constant depression or anxiety that whispers, "You are not doing what you were meant to do." This is the sound of your authentic self rattling the gilded bars of the cage you built. The good news is that recognizing this trap is the first, most terrifying step toward escape. The urgency of the problem demands a rebellion, a radical internal shift that challenges everything you have been conditioned to believe. It is time to move from diagnosis to deliverance. The path out of servitude is not marked by revolution against external authority, but by an internal coup d'état, a radical shift in perspective that challenges the most sacred dogmas of the modern age. This rebellion begins with the terrifying, yet exhilarating realization that the meaning of your life is not discovered, it is invented. The first step in this intellectual and spiritual uprising is to adopt Nietzsche's most potent concept, the Übermensch, the overman or superman. This is not a genetic superior, but a philosophical superior, one who overcomes the inherent nihilism of existence by creating their own values, their own purpose, and their own law. The Übermensch is the one who looks at the abyss of meaninglessness and, instead of recoiling in despair and seeking refuge in comforting lies, embraces the challenge to become a self-legislator. This requires the radical, counterintuitive practice of affirming the agony. The slave seeks comfort, ease, and the elimination of suffering. The master, the one who breaks free, recognizes that suffering is not an obstacle to life, but its forge. Viktor Frankl, writing from the depths of a Nazi concentration camp, proved that what truly enslaves a person is the loss of a meaningful why. a purpose for their suffering. The rebellion, therefore, is to stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "For what ultimate purpose can I endure and transcend this?" This act of choosing a purpose in spite of suffering, the defiance of despair, is the ultimate act of freedom. The second pillar of the rebellion is the dethroning of the crowd. The slave lives in constant fear of social isolation, a condition that the philosopher Aldous Huxley recognized as a primary tool of societal control. To break free, you must cultivate the strength of solitude, not as an escape from people, but as a necessary retreat to find and solidify your own center. Solitude is the laboratory where values are tested and true identity is forged. You must deliberately practice what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a unified, distinct being, independent of the collective psyche. This means consciously separating your authentic desires from the programmed desires of the culture, the noisy demands for status, wealth, and effortless happiness. You must learn to hear the quiet, steady voice of your own conscience, even when it directly contradicts the roar of the mob. To solidify this new identity, you must embrace the ultimate test of self-authorship, the eternal recurrence. Imagine, Nietzsche asked, that a demon appears to you in your loneliest solitude and tells you that you will have to live your life again and again, in eternal repetition, down to the last pain and the last joy. Would you fall down and curse the demon, or would you reply, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? This is not a scientific proposition. It is the most demanding ethical framework ever devised. It forces you to live every moment, every choice, every compromise, every action, with such integrity and self-approval that you would will its eternal return. It shatters bad faith instantly. If you are living a life you would despise reliving forever, you are a slave. If you are living a life you would joyfully affirm for all eternity, you are free. This counterintuitive solution demands that your life be a work of art, authored solely by you, judged only by your highest self. The practical acts of rebellion are small, difficult daily choices. Stop consuming. Start creating. Redirect the energy you spend absorbing content and chasing distraction into producing something, anything, that requires your unique effort and expresses your true thought. Define your own metrics of success. Abandon the socially dictated benchmarks of wealth, title, or popularity. What is your victory? Define it, write it down, and pursue it ruthlessly, regardless of external recognition. Embrace necessary conflict. Stop avoiding difficult conversations, necessary confrontations, and internal struggles. The slave avoids friction. The master uses friction to sharpen the self. True relationships and authentic selfhood are only forged in the fire of honest engagement. This rebellion is agonizing because it means letting go of your past excuses and the victim narrative. It means accepting total, radical responsibility. It is the arduous journey from being a reactive, conditioned product of circumstance to becoming the conscious, deliberate creator of your own existence. This path of self-overcoming is lonely, but it is the only one that leads to genuine, unshakable freedom. The ultimate truth. The final, most powerful realization. The ultimate truth, the deepest revelation that redefines everything, is a devastating and empowering paradigm shift. It is the realization that the cage was never locked from the outside. It was reinforced by your own will to remain small. All your struggles, all your anxieties about worthlessness, suddenly become clear in hindsight. They were the painful byproducts of your resistance to your own magnificent potential. The final, most powerful realization is this: you are not fighting a system. You are fighting the consensus reality you helped create. The external pressures, the societal expectations, the media narratives. These only possess power because of the massive, collective psychological investment they receive. Your servitude is not enforced by a tyrant with a whip. It is maintained by your subconscious agreement that it is easier to be a slave to comfort than a sovereign over your chaos. The moment you grasp this truth, everything shifts. The world is no longer a set of constraints you must navigate, but a canvas upon which you are called to impose your meaning. This is the leap from what philosopher Martin Heidegger called Dasein, being there, the average unauthentic existence, to authentic existence, a life lived in full, agonizing awareness of your finitude and your freedom. This authenticity requires you to accept the terrifying corollary of freedom. Isolation is the price of originality. When you truly become a master of your own soul, when you create your own values and affirm your own unique life, you will inevitably drift away from the comfortable center of the herd. The majority will not understand your choices. They will interpret your courage as arrogance, your discipline as obsession, and your solitude as pathology. But this necessary isolation is not loneliness. It is the sublime, creative solitude that makes true work possible. The slave seeks constant company to dull the ache of an unexamined life. The master seeks the quiet space to hear the commands of his highest self. The highest form of this self-mastery is the Amor Fati, love of fate. This is not passive resignation. It is the active, joyful affirmation of everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen. It means looking back at your failures, your pains, your humiliations, the very things you wish you could undo, and saying, "It was necessary. It was perfect. I will it to be so again." Amor Fati turns every past mistake into an essential building block, every trauma into a source of profound strength, and every limitation into a defining feature of your unique trajectory. By affirming the necessity of your personal history, you strip it of its power to define or control you. You cease being the victim of circumstance and become the artist of your destiny. This brings us to the ultimate, crowning realization. Your life is your only argument. Forget the debates, the justifications, the explanations. You do not need to convince anyone of your freedom. You only need to live it. The slave measures life by longevity and comfort. The master measures it by intensity and impact. Did you feel the full spectrum of existence? Did you push the boundaries of your own nature? Did you create something? A piece of work, a moment of courage, a life of integrity that justifies the terrifying privilege of consciousness? To be a slave is to live life defensively, seeking only to avoid loss. To be a master is to live life offensively, willing to risk everything for the sake of realizing your potential. Your final act of liberation is to step out of the metaphor of the cage and into the blinding light of the great plane of responsibility. There are no guarantees, no fixed paths, and no external saviors. There is only the wind, the sky, and the staggering weight and glory of your own, radical freedom. You now possess the truth. You were never bound by the world, but by your fear of yourself. The key was in your hand all along. What will you create with your one, eternally recurring, entirely chosen life?